man in the shadows. The first time Keanu walked through the wide steel gates of the warehouse, nobody knew who he was. He wore an old gray hoodie, work boots that had seen better days, and a name tag that simply said, Keanu. He didn't speak much. He just nodded at the security guard and quietly stepped inside the loud, busy building filled with forklifts, machines, and the smell of sweat and oil. No one could guess that this quiet man with gentle eyes once stood in front of flashing cameras and cheering fans. Here in this place, he wasn't a star. He was just another worker, and that's exactly how he wanted it. He had come to this small Midwestern town after hearing about a local manufacturing company that was struggling to keep its doors open. It had once been the pride of the town. 3 generations of families had worked there. But now machines were breaking down, morale was low, and rumors of layoffs were spreading like wildfire. Keanu didn't arrive as a celebrity or a millionaire. He came in as a temp worker. He didn't want attention. He wanted to understand. He wanted to help, but from within. On his first day, the foreman, a sharp-tongued man named Dave, handed him a broom and told him to sweep the floor. "You're the new guy. Don't mess this up," Dave barked before walking off. Keanu didn't mind. He swept every inch of the floor, even behind the heavy machines where no one ever looked. The other workers watched him curiously, whispering among themselves. One of them, a young man named Jason, laughed and nudged his friend. "Look at him, acting like he owns the place. Too clean for someone pushing a broom." Keanu heard, but he didn't react. He just kept working. The next few days passed in silence. Keanu was always on time, always polite, always doing more than he was asked. He cleaned oil stains, organized tools, and even fixed a broken locker door without being told. But instead of being appreciated, his efforts drew cold glances. Some of the older workers whispered that he was trying too hard. Others feared he would make them look bad. Dave began giving him the dirtiest jobs, the ones no one else wanted. One morning, Keanu arrived early and saw a woman struggling to carry a heavy box of parts across the loading dock. Her name was Rosa, a single mother who had worked there for over a decade. Without saying a word, he rushed to her side and lifted the box effortlessly, walking with her across the warehouse. She smiled gratefully and said, "Thank you, Keanu. Most people just look away." He nodded. "It's no problem." That simple act of kindness spread quickly, but instead of earning him respect, it fueled the jealousy in Dave's heart. He had been with the company for 20 years. He was used to being the one others listened to, the one in charge. Now this new guy, this quiet stranger with kind eyes, was earning the trust of people without even trying. It bothered Dave. It made him angry in ways he didn't understand. A few days later, Dave gave Keanu a job fixing a jammed conveyor belt in the back room. The belt hadn't worked in months, and Dave assumed Keanu would fail. But within 2 hours, it was running smoothly. Workers clapped and cheered as the machines came back to life. Dave watched from the shadows, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. That night, he called a few of the younger workers to the side and whispered something that would change everything. The next day, the air was different. Keanu felt it as soon as he walked in. The looks were sharper, the laughter a little louder, and the whispers more cruel. During lunch, while Keanu sat alone in the corner with his sandwich, Jason and his group walked by and accidentally knocked over a bottle of Coca-Cola. The sugary drink spilled across the table and onto Keanu's pants. "Oops," Jason said, with a smirk. "Didn't see you there." For a brief moment, the room went quiet. Everyone looked at Keanu, waiting for him to explode, to curse, to fight back. But he didn't. He simply stood up, wiped the mess with a napkin, and walked to the restroom without saying a word. Rosa watched with wide eyes. Later, she approached him quietly. "You didn't deserve that," she said. Keanu looked at her with calm eyes. Some people are hurting inside. They just don't know how to say it. Those words stuck with Rosa, and as the days went on, she began to see the truth behind them. Dave kept pushing Keanu harder. He assigned him to night shifts, gave him faulty equipment, and made cruel jokes during safety meetings. Each time, Keanu responded with grace. He helped others when they were behind on tasks. He cleaned up when machines leaked. He listened when workers talked about their problems. And slowly some began to see him not as a threat, but as someone different, someone strong. But Dave couldn't stand it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the warehouse roof, the foreman called a secret meeting. "We can't let this guy make us look like fools," he growled. "He's trying to take over. Don't let the smile fool you. He wants your jobs." Jason nodded. "What do you want us to do?" Dave leaned in, lowering his voice. "Make him want to quit. Make him regret ever walking through that door." What followed was a storm of little cruelties. Tools disappeared from Keanu's station. His locker was vandalized. Someone poured motor oil in his work boots. Yet every time Keanu simply found a way to keep going. He never raised his voice. He never complained to management. He just worked. And that calm strength began to make Dave's plan fall apart. Then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, there was a sudden emergency. A large machine overheated and began to spark. Flames licked at the wires. Smoke filled the air. Workers shouted and ran, but Keanu didn't. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and ran straight toward the danger. He climbed up the side, dodging sparks, and managed to shut down the system before it exploded. The fire was out. No one was hurt. Everyone watched in stunned silence. The plant manager, a woman named Martha who rarely came down to the floor, arrived minutes later. She looked at the machine, then at Keanu. "Who are you?" she asked. Keanu smiled faintly. "Just someone who cares." The next day, Martha called a company-wide meeting. She praised the bravery and calm of one of their own. If it weren't for him, this entire section could have gone up in flames. His actions saved lives, she said. Then she looked around. We should all be asking, why did it take a fire for us to notice what was right in front of us? There was silence. Even Dave lowered his head. But the story wasn't over. That night, as Keanu left the building, he found a note taped to his adieu. It read, "You think you're better than us? You'll wish you never came here." He stood there for a long time, holding the note, staring into the dark parking lot. He knew the kindness he had shown had threatened something deeper, something that had nothing to do with job performance and everything to do with broken pride, hidden fear, and buried pain. He sighed, tucked the note into his pocket, and drove off into the night. But inside he knew this was just the beginning. Something bigger was coming. And next time, it wouldn't be just a bottle of Coca-Cola. Whispers in the break room, the days after the fire, felt strangely quiet inside the warehouse. But it wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace. It was thick, heavy, and humming with confusion. Some workers who used to laugh behind Keanu's back now avoided his gaze. Others glanced at him with a new sense of wonder, even guilt. Rosa brought him a cup of warm tea one morning and placed it on his table without a word. When he looked up and thanked her, she just smiled and whispered, "You saved all of us." But that quiet gratitude couldn't stop the storm that was still brewing beneath the surface. The incident had made the higher-ups curious. Martha began showing up, more frequently on the floor, watching not just the machines but the workers. She noticed who was doing their job and who was stirring unrest. Dave, who once barked orders with unchecked confidence, now softened his tone whenever she passed by. He knew the fire had shifted things. His grip on control was slipping, and he couldn't stand it. What angered him most wasn't Keanu's actions. It was the way people had started to respect him without him even trying. On a cold Thursday morning, Dave called Jason into his office. He didn't yell. Instead, he closed the door quietly and leaned against his desk. "We need to remind everyone who's really in charge," he said, his voice low and steady. "If you let one man walk in here and change the way things work, then everything we built, everything we've endured, gets thrown away like trash." Jason nodded slowly, his usual smirk replaced by a look of uncertainty. "But he saved our lives," he mumbled. Dave stared at him. "And if we let him become the hero, what does that make the rest of us?" Meanwhile, Keanu continued his routine, never asking for attention, never demanding praise. He still mopped floors, repaired broken handles, and cleaned up after others. But something inside him had begun to shift too. The note on his windshield hadn't scared him, but it had reminded him that kindness often comes with a cost. Yet it was a price he had always been willing to pay. The truth was, Keanu had seen this kind of bitterness before, in Hollywood, on sets where egos clashed, where one man's humility was mistaken for weakness and another's cruelty was rewarded with applause. This warehouse was just another stage, and he was once again the quiet character walking into a world full of masks. A few days later, while most of the workers sat in the break room eating lunch and scrolling through their phones, Martha came in and asked Keanu to join her for a walk around the floor. Whispers followed them as they walked. No one knew what they were discussing, but the sight of the plant manager talking privately with a low-level temp didn't go unnoticed. Dave watched from his office window, his hands trembling slightly. Something had to be done, and soon. During their walk, Martha asked about Keanu's background. She had done some digging but found nothing more than the name he had given. Keanu. No last name, no resume, no references. "You're not like the others," she said softly. "You don't talk much, but your actions speak loud. Tell me why. You're really here." Keanu paused by an old machine and ran his hand along its metal frame. "When I was younger, my mom worked in a place like this. She used to come home tired, her hands cracked, her back hurting. I always wished someone would have helped her, not just with the work, but with kindness. When I found out this company was struggling, I thought maybe I could do something useful. Not as someone famous, just as someone who cares." Martha looked at him for a long time before nodding slowly. "I believe you," she said, "but you've made enemies without even knowing it. People don't like change, and some would rather break something than watch it improve without them." The warning in her voice was clear. Keanu understood. As they walked back into the warehouse, someone had written on the wall in thick red marker, "Hero or fraud." It was a small act, easy to miss, but it spoke volumes. Dave's plan had moved into a new phase, one where whispers became questions, and questions became doubts. Later that day, Keanu was asked to join a different team on a special project. An old machine that had been offline for years, one that the company hoped to restore and use to increase production. Martha trusted him. But when Dave heard the news, he couldn't contain his rage. He called a meeting with his closest allies, Jason, Tom, and a few others. "This ends now," he growled. "We're going to make sure that machine fails. And when it does, we'll pin it on him. No one will trust him after that." Meanwhile, Keanu approached the task with quiet focus. He studied the blueprints, worked late into the night, and slowly brought the old equipment back to life. Rosa offered to help during her breaks, and soon others joined, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Something about the way Keanu worked invited others to believe again, in themselves, in the work, and in each other. The machine began to hum after weeks of silence. Parts moved, lights blinked, the sound of progress echoed through the walls. But just when everything seemed to be working, a sudden jerk, a loud screech, and then a heavy slam shook the room. The conveyor belt snapped loose. Pieces fell to the floor. Sparks flew. Everyone jumped back. Keanu rushed to hit the emergency stop button. When the dust cleared, the damage was visible. The machine had nearly crushed Rosa, who had just stepped back seconds before. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. An investigation began immediately. Dave stepped forward with perfect timing. "I warned you, this guy was dangerous," he said to Martha in front of everyone. "He's reckless, and now look, he almost got someone killed." Keanu stood quietly as all eyes turned to him. Martha narrowed her eyes and turned to Jason. "You were part of the inspection team yesterday. Did you sign off on this?" Jason looked away, then at Dave, then back at Martha. His lips trembled. I don't remember seeing anything wrong." Dave smiled. "It was working." Martha nodded slowly. "Until we figure this out, Keanu, I'm going to have to pull you off the floor. Safety comes first." The words hit harder than any insult. Not because of the temporary suspension, but because he had let someone get hurt. Rosa was fine, but it could have been worse. Much worse. Keanu sat alone in the parking lot that evening, the cold air pressing against his face. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. It wasn't the first time the world had turned on him when he had tried to help. He thought about all the times in his life when silence was easier than truth, when walking away was easier than standing firm. But this time, something inside him said no, not this time. Not while people like Rosa were still trying. Not while a place like this still had a chance. That night, Keanu drove home, but not to rest. Instead, he opened an old storage box in the corner of his rented apartment. Inside were tools, notebooks, and a single black binder full of records. From years ago, engineering notes, repair manuals, diagrams he had studied long before becoming an actor. He had learned all of it not to impress, but to prepare. Now it was time to use it. He wasn't going to fight with fists or threats. He was going to fight with truth, with knowledge, with proof. And the next morning, he would return, not just to work, but to uncover what had really gone wrong with that machine. Because this story wasn't about fame, it was about dignity. And it was far from over. The blueprint of betrayal. The sun was barely rising when Keanu Reeves stepped back through the steel gates of the warehouse. Despite the official suspension, he walked in with quiet purpose, not to return to his workstation but to seek answers. A man who had spent decades surrounded by sets, lights, and scripts had now stepped into a role that demanded no audience. Only truth. The binder he carried under his arm was worn, filled with notes and sketches, calculations and references, all made by his own hand years ago during long nights of study, when fame had faded into background noise and life had forced him to find new ways to stay grounded. He wasn't here to argue or to plead innocence. He was here to investigate. Inside the warehouse, the energy had shifted. After the machine failure, whispers had turned into doubts, and doubts had begun to spread like rust on old steel. Workers, who had once admired Keanu's calm strength, now avoided eye contact, unsure of what to believe. Rosa had taken a few days off to recover, but her absence made the room feel colder. Keanu headed straight to the storage room where spare parts and maintenance records were kept. No one stopped him. Perhaps they didn't notice, or perhaps they simply didn't care enough to interfere. He opened the maintenance logs for the conveyor system and flipped through the recent entries. What he found was alarming. Someone had signed off on a component replacement that never happened. The part that had failed, the very piece that caused the malfunction, was listed as repaired and tested. But Keanu had personally examined that part before the machine was activated. He knew its wear and tear. It hadn't been replaced, and whoever forged the records did it knowing the consequences could be deadly. His hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but because betrayal had taken root deeper than he thought. This wasn't just about jealousy anymore. It was about sabotage. Keanu spent the rest of the morning quietly gathering evidence. He inspected the damaged machine again, took photos with his phone, and compared every component to his binder notes and the official repair logs. Every discrepancy he found told the same story. Someone had deliberately set him up, but proving it wouldn't be easy. The people involved weren't just careless, they were cunning. He needed someone inside, someone who had access to what he didn't. At lunch, he found Jason alone in the break room, hunched over a sandwich, looking more worn out than usual. Keanu sat down across from him without asking and placed the binder on the table. Jason glanced up, his eyes filled with unease. "What do you want?" he muttered, glancing around as if expecting Dave to walk in at any moment. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He opened the binder, turned it to a specific page, and slid it across the table. "You signed this form," he said, tapping the maintenance log. "You said the machine was safe, but it wasn't, and I don't think you did that on your own." Jason swallowed hard, then looked down at the page. Silence stretched between them before he finally spoke. "I didn't know it would get that bad," he whispered. "I thought it was just a small part. Dave said it wouldn't matter, that you'd probably mess something up anyway." "So, you helped him?" Keanu asked, his voice still calm but firm. Jason looked ashamed. I didn't want to lose my job. I got a baby on the way. And Dave, he's got dirt on everyone. You go against him, he'll make sure you regret it." Keanu leaned back slightly, processing the truth. He had seen fear like this before, fear used like a weapon. But this time, it was clear that the root of the warehouse's problems wasn't laziness or incompetence. It was a culture of fear. One man controlling everyone through manipulation, silence, and pressure. If Keanu wanted to fix this place, he couldn't just prove his innocence. He had to expose the whole system. He looked Jason in the eyes. "You made a mistake, but it's not too late to do the right thing. Help me set the record straight, not just for me, but for Rosa, for the others. This place used to be something good. It can be again." Jason hesitated, then slowly nodded. "I'll try." That evening, while most workers had gone home, Keanu stayed behind. With Jason's help, they accessed internal emails, maintenance camera logs, and repair orders. And what they found painted a clear picture. For months, Dave had been manipulating records, shifting blame, and even selling off company materials for personal gain. Every mistake had been buried under false signatures and misplaced paperwork. Keanu took photos of every document, created backups of every file. He was preparing for something big, something public. But Dave wasn't blind. The next morning, he noticed the shift in Jason's behavior. He saw Keanu and Jason talking quietly near the tool cages, reviewing files together, moving with a kind of shared purpose. Suspicion turned into panic. Dave called a meeting with his allies and laid out one final plan. "We can't let this get out," he snapped. "We shut him down now, before he takes us all down." They planned to confront Keanu in the warehouse floor in front of everyone. Embarrass him, discredit him, accuse him of hacking, stealing, anything that would make him look like a fraud. It wasn't just about protecting Dave's position anymore. It was about survival. As the next shift began, the workers gathered in the main hall for a standard safety briefing. But this one felt different. Dave stepped forward, holding a clipboard and a folder in his hands. "Before we begin," he said, loudly, "I need to talk about something important. We have a security issue. Someone's been tampering with private files and spreading lies." Keanu stood at the edge of the crowd, silent. "This person," Dave continued, raising his voice, "has no credentials, no verified identity, no experience in manufacturing, and yet he's been digging into systems, manipulating people, and putting lives at risk." The crowd began to murmur. Eyes turned toward Keanu. Dave walked closer, his finger pointed. "This man isn't who he says he is. He's a liar, and he's dangerous." Keanu took one step forward, then reached into his coat and pulled out a thick folder. He handed it to Martha, who had just arrived and was standing at the edge of the room. The room fell silent. "Before you listen to more lies," Keanu said, his voice steady and loud enough for all to hear, "you should read the truth." Martha opened the folder and began to scan the documents. As her eyes moved across each page, her expression hardened. She looked at Keanu, then at Dave. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "From your own servers," Keanu replied, with help from someone who finally had the courage to do the right thing. Martha turned to the workers. "I want everyone to return to your stations. This meeting is over. And Dave, I need you in my office. Now." As the crowd dispersed, confusion and whispers filled the air. Dave's face had turned pale, his mouth opening to protest, but no words came out. He followed Martha out of the room while Keanu remained behind, surrounded by uncertainty and silence. He knew this wasn't the end. In fact, it was only the beginning of what had to be the hardest part, rebuilding trust. That evening, Rosa returned to work. When she saw Keanu near the front desk, she walked over and hugged him tightly. "I heard what happened," she whispered. "Thank you for standing up." Keanu smiled faintly. "I wasn't the only one." But as they stood there, neither of them noticed the figure watching them from the far corner of the room. Eyes sharp, fists clenched, waiting, because Dave might have been exposed but not defeated. The storm beneath the silence. For 3 full days after the confrontation, The warehouse buzzed with quiet unrest. No official word came from the office upstairs, but everyone knew something had shifted. Martha's usual calm presence had turned into something firmer. She walked the floor more often, observed more carefully, and asked more questions. The whispers that once followed Keanu with suspicion now drifted in a different tone. Some people still doubted. Others began to reconsider everything they had believed, but most of all, a silence fell over the group that used to follow Dave. They no longer laughed at Break, no longer sneered at the sight of Keanu working, and no longer tried to assert their place in a hierarchy that was cracking at the seams. Keanu spent those days in the background just as he always had. He didn't seek praise. He didn't remind anyone what he had done. Instead, he focused on the one thing that kept him grounded: helping. He fixed a set of broken wheels on a delivery cart without being asked. He stayed late to clean up a leaking coolant spill that could have been dangerous if left overnight. He replaced the light bulbs in the far back corner of the warehouse, the ones no one else had touched in months. And he never mentioned Dave's name even when others did. When Jason approached him during a break and said, "I think people are starting to see the truth," Keanu simply nodded and replied, "What matters is what we build next, not who we blame." But not everyone shared his calm. Upstairs, Martha had launched a quiet internal investigation. The folder Keanu had given her was only part of a much larger web. She called in external auditors, reviewed camera footage, and checked inventory records. What she discovered went beyond sabotage. It revealed years of missing inventory, ghost employees, and backdoor deals made under the company's name. It wasn't just Dave. He had been part of a network of corruption that bled money from the company and nearly brought it to collapse. The board of directors was notified. Legal teams began gathering evidence. Martha kept the findings private for now, but she knew a storm was coming, and when it arrived, it would wipe out everything in its path. On the fourth morning, just as the sun rose over the frosted windows, Martha called Keanu into her office. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, as though trying to understand how someone like him had found his way into a place like this. "You've done more for this company in weeks than some people have done in decades," she said quietly. "I owe you more than a thank you." Keanu shook his head. "I don't need thanks. I just didn't want to see this place fall apart when it didn't have to." Martha reached for a folder on her desk. "You said you came here to help because of your mother, that you saw her go through this kind of life. But there's something else, isn't there?" Keanu hesitated. His gaze dropped for a moment. Then he slowly nodded. "When I was younger, after everything that happened with my family, the loss, the pain, the loneliness, I realized the only thing that ever made sense to me was being useful. Not being famous, not being admired, just useful. So I started volunteering, learning trades, listening, and this warehouse. It reminded me of something pure. People working hard, not for attention, but for survival. I thought maybe, if I helped fix one broken place, maybe something in me would feel a little less broken too." Martha listened with care, her eyes softening. Then she opened the folder and pushed it toward him. "This is an offer, not just for a full-time position, but for a leadership role. I know who you are. Now I know your history, and I also know this company needs someone with your heart, your steadiness. Think about it." Keanu didn't open the folder. He placed a hand over it and smiled faintly. "Thank you. But I think the best leaders are the ones who don't need titles. Let's just focus on rebuilding together." They stood and shook hands. As Keanu left the office, he didn't notice the shadow lingering behind the hallway door. Dave had returned, fired from his position but not yet arrested. He had come to the warehouse early, unnoticed, using his old access badge before it was deactivated. Anger festered in him like an open wound. He had lost everything: his authority, his image, his influence. And worst of all, he had lost it to a man who never once tried to take it from him. The humiliation of it boiled in his chest. All of it. The way people looked at Keanu now. The way Martha listened to him. the way the workers seemed to stand a little taller in his presence. Dave had never known peace, only power, and when he lost it, he decided if he couldn't control the warehouse, he'd ruin it. That afternoon, Keanu returned to the machine he had helped revive, the same one that had nearly caused Rosa's injury. It was time to run a final test before full operations resumed. Jason joined him along with another technician. They worked in quiet focus, double-checking every bolt, every gear, every wire. Rosa returned from her short leave and watched from a distance, still shaken, but determined to move forward. The machine began to move again, smooth and steady. But what none of them knew was that Dave had planted something deep in the control system, an override designed to trigger a fault at full capacity. It wasn't just sabotage. It was an act of revenge. As the gears spun and the motors picked up speed, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Keanu looked up, eyebrows furrowed. Something was wrong. He ran to the panel and hit the diagnostics. The screen flashed red. He shouted to Jason and the technician to shut it down. Sparks burst from the side of the machine. A loud pop. Then the metal casing began to smoke. Workers scrambled back. Alarms rang. Keanu grabbed the extinguisher, but the heat was intense. Then suddenly, everything went black. The power failed. A deep silence followed, broken only by the sound of hissing steam. In the emergency lights, Keanu moved fast. He used a crowbar to pry open the side panel. His hands, already covered in soot, reached in and pulled the main fuse. The spark stopped. The fire, just inches from spreading, died down. Martha arrived moments later, breathless, with the emergency team behind her. She looked at the damaged panel, at the half-melted wires, and then at Keanu. His clothes burnt at the edges, his face covered in ash, but his eyes calm. "Someone did this," Keanu said. "I know," she replied. "We're tracking the cameras now," but he already knew. And deep down, so did everyone else. That night, the footage confirmed it. Dave had broken in. He had triggered the override system. He had nearly destroyed the warehouse and risked every life inside. Police were called. An arrest was made. But the emotional damage ran deeper than the law could repair. Trust, once shaken, doesn't return easily. Fear lingers in corners, long after the threat is gone. Yet something else began to rise in that moment. Courage. Because after the smoke cleared and the power returned, Keanu didn't leave. He stayed. He gathered the team. He looked each worker in the eyes, not with judgment, not with blame, but with purpose. "This place is still standing," he said. "Because we are, every one of us. Now we fix what's broken. Not just the machines, but the way we treat each other." A long silence followed. Then Rosa stepped forward and placed her hand on his shoulder. "We're with you." And one by one they all nodded. The storm had passed, but a new chapter was just beginning. The quiet rebuild, the days that followed, were not filled with celebrations or grand announcements. Instead, they were filled with small, deliberate actions, the kind that truly change a place from the inside. The burned machine sat quietly under a large tarp, a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. Keanu stood before it every morning before his shift began, not to mourn its failure, but to reflect on the strength it had awakened in the people around him. For the first time since he arrived at the warehouse, there was unity. Not perfect harmony, but an honest shared intention to repair more than equipment. They were trying to repair trust, and for the first time, they weren't doing it alone. Keanu didn't carry a title, but his presence had become something more powerful than authority. It was steadiness in a place that had been uncertain for too long. Jason, once a tool in Dave's plans, now shadowed Keanu daily, not out of guilt, but out of a quiet desire to learn. He asked questions, studied the blueprints Keanu scribbled in his old notebooks, and stayed late without being told. Rosa returned stronger than ever, offering to lead the safety training for new hires, determined that no one else would suffer the fear she once faced. And slowly, the air in the warehouse began to feel lighter, cleaner, not because of the machines, but because the people were finally breathing without fear. Martha, true to her word, had begun major reforms. She had terminated those involved in Dave's network, not with public scorn but with professional firmness. She made it clear that this company would be rebuilt on integrity, and those unwilling to walk that path had no place there. She invited outside consultants to improve workflow efficiency, upgraded safety protocols, and, most importantly, created a new feedback system where any worker could raise concerns anonymously. But it was Keanu who suggested the most important idea of all: monthly open forums where everyone, from the janitor to management, could sit in the same room and speak without fear of consequence. That first meeting was awkward. The room was quiet. The chairs creaked under nervous shifting and eyes refused to meet. But Keanu broke the silence. Not with a lecture, but with a question. What's one thing that would have made your job easier last week? At first, no one spoke. Then Rosa raised her hand and said, "Better gloves. The ones we have now tear too easily." Keanu nodded and turned to Martha, who made a note. Then another hand went up. Then another. What began as hesitation slowly turned into real conversation, and by the end of the meeting they weren't just sharing complaints, they were building solutions. Keanu still worked on the floor. He refused the corner office that Martha offered, and instead, he chose to remain among the workers. "Real leadership," he once said, "doesn't sit behind glass. It stands beside the people." His words were simple, but they carried weight, because they came from action. He didn't need recognition, but recognition found him anyway. One afternoon, a reporter showed up at the warehouse gates, tipped off by someone about a Hollywood actor fixing machines in secret. When she approached Keanu, he politely declined the interview. "Why not share your story?" she asked, confused. "The world should hear this." Keanu looked around the warehouse, at Jason measuring gears, at Rosa giving instructions near the supply shelves, at the team lifting parts together. "This isn't my story," he said quietly. "This is theirs. I just showed up." Word still spread. Quietly, respectfully. News didn't need flashing headlines anymore. It moved through conversations, through workers telling their families, and through suppliers noticing the improved morale during delivery visits. People began applying for jobs at the warehouse again, not because of fame, but because of change. They heard that something different was happening here, something rare, and yet, not all was smooth. Even as things improved, Keanu noticed the small cracks that could still grow into larger problems. New workers brought new personalities. Some wanted fast promotions. Others questioned the idea of open leadership. One in particular, a young man named Mark, began to challenge decisions openly, not to improve things, but to push buttons. He scoffed at Keanu's ideas, mocked the idea of humility as weakness, and called the monthly forums therapy sessions for people too soft for real work. Keanu didn't respond with anger. Instead, he invited Mark to join him on a task most avoided, restoring the old rooftop ventilation fans. It was dirty, dangerous work. They climbed the rusted ladders, hauled equipment under the sun, and repaired years of neglect. At first, Mark grumbled, complaining about the heat and the pointlessness of the job. But as the hours passed, something shifted. When Keanu, covered in grime, handed him a water bottle and said, "Thank you for not quitting," Mark blinked, surprised. "Why would you thank me?" he asked. "Because most people walk away when they feel unseen. You didn't." The next day, Mark joined the cleanup crew without being told. Keanu never bragged about these small changes, but Martha noticed. So did the board of directors. At a private meeting, they discussed honoring him with a plaque, a ceremony, even a statue in the entrance hall, but Martha stopped them. "If you really want to honor him," she said, "build what he's building, quiet strength. Give your workers better hours, safer tools, and real dignity. That'll mean more than any statue." They agreed. Weeks passed, then months. The warehouse, once known for its chaos and complaints, became an example for other companies. Its safety record improved, productivity doubled, absenteeism dropped, and every visitor who walked through its doors left with The same strange comment. Something feels different here. They couldn't name it, but the workers could. It was kindness. And though it wore a hoodie and steel-toed boots, and though it spoke softly and didn't carry a title, it held the whole place together. But as all things in life tend to go, just when peace begins to settle, life finds a way to test it. One quiet evening, as Keanu finished his final rounds, checking equipment and logging maintenance notes, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, with no message, just a missed call. Then another, and then a third. He stepped outside into the cool night air and called back. A woman's voice answered. "Mr. Reeves, I'm sorry to disturb you, but we need your help. It's urgent. It's about your mother." His hand trembled as the wind picked up, carrying the sound of the warehouse doors creaking closed behind him. Something far more personal than sabotage or broken machines was coming, and this time, the man who saved everyone else might need saving. Himself. The man who never left. The next morning, the warehouse was humming with quiet activity, but Keanu Reeves was nowhere to be found. Rosa noticed first. She had arrived early, as always, coffee in hand, ready to begin the day. When she passed his usual corner, the old tool station he had cleaned and repaired with his own hands, she paused, waiting for the gentle nod he gave every morning. But there was only stillness. At first, she thought maybe he had taken a rare day off. After all, no one had worked harder. No one had given more. But as the hours passed, people began to whisper. He wasn't at the maintenance station. He hadn't clocked in. He hadn't answered his phone. And suddenly there was a hole in the room, like a missing beam holding the structure upright. Even without saying it, they all felt it. Far away, in a quiet hospice facility tucked into the hills of Northern California, Keanu sat beside a hospital bed. The woman lying beneath the blankets was small now, almost weightless, her once vibrant eyes dulled by time and struggle. It had been years since they had truly spoken, years filled with scattered phone calls, busy schedules, and the silent guilt of a son who never felt he'd done enough. But now, faced with the closing chapter of the woman who once worked 3 jobs just to pay for his shoes, Keanu felt all his past achievements shrink beside the simple truth. He was her boy, and she had given him everything. She opened her eyes slowly and smiled, barely able to lift her hand. Keanu held it gently as though holding glass. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I never left," he said softly. "Not really." They didn't speak much after that. There were no grand apologies or confessions, no speeches about regret or time lost. Just quiet. Just presence. And in that silence, Keanu realized something. All the time he had spent helping others, all the machines he had fixed, all the people he had lifted up, none of it would have been possible without the strength of the woman before him. Her hands, once calloused and raw, had washed dishes and folded laundry so he could read books and dream. Her back, once bent under the weight of bills and expectations, had given him the strength to carry others. She had been his first teacher, his first home. And now in her final hours, all he could do was sit beside her and return the gift of presence. When she passed, she did so with peace. Her fingers still curled gently around his. Keanu didn't cry, not because he didn't feel, but because the moment was too full. Tears would come later. But now, he just sat with her, as the light filtered through the window and the world turned a little more quietly. He stayed in town for 3 more days. Not to grieve in isolation, but to settle her affairs, to speak with old neighbors, to walk the streets they once shared. He visited the grocery store where she used to work nights and bought a single apple, just like she used to bring him after every shift. And when he returned to the warehouse on the 5th day, he didn't walk through the side door as he normally did. He came through the front where a crowd had gathered. Someone had told the story. They had learned why he was gone. And now, they were all waiting, not for a speech, but to welcome back the man who had never asked for anything and given everything as he stepped through the doors. Applause broke out. Not loud, not chaotic, but slow and steady. Rosa stood at the front, holding something in her hands. It was the name tag he had worn on his first day. still scratched, still bent. She handed it to him. "We saved your spot," she said, her voice trembling. Keanu took it, smiled gently, and replied, "I never really left." Martha called everyone together for a meeting. But this time, it wasn't about safety updates or production targets. It was about legacy. She announced a new policy effective immediately. Every employee who had served more than 10 years would receive a full healthcare stipend, not as a bonus, but as a right. The decision was inspired by Keanu's story and by the woman who had shaped him. The workers clapped, some with tears in their eyes. But Martha wasn't done. "We also want to rename the central workshop," she said. "From today, it will be called the KeanuReeves Engineering Center, in honor of a mother who showed the world what quiet sacrifice can build." Keanu lowered his head. For a long moment he said nothing. Then softly he whispered. She would have smiled at that. Life returned to the warehouse with renewed spirit. Work resumed, machines roared, and new projects blossomed. Keanu didn't change his role. He still cleaned spills, tightened bolts, and shared his lunch with the new hires. But now, there was something different in the way people looked at him. Not as a mystery or a savior, but as one of their own. His presence reminded them of something rare, that dignity didn't come from position, but from how you treated people when no one was watching. One evening, long after the sun had set, Jason approached Keanu as he was locking up the supply shed. He held out an envelope. "We all chipped in," he said awkwardly. "We thought maybe you could take a break. Go somewhere, rest." Keanu opened the envelope and saw a stack of bus tickets, gift cards, and handwritten notes. He chuckled softly. "I appreciate it," he said. "But you know what? This place, it's the vacation. Because here people are honest, and that's more rare than beaches and stars." Jason nodded, eyes shining. "You changed us, you know?" Keanu looked out over the warehouse floor, where machines glowed under warm lights and workers laughed during their night shift. "You changed yourselves. I just reminded you what you were capable of." As the night deepened and silence wrapped the building like a blanket, Keanu walked toward the back exit. Before he stepped outside, he turned and looked one last time at the workshop. A brass plaque now hung above the door, shining in the soft light. The KeanuReeves Engineering Center, built on kindness, powered by courage. He smiled, closed the door behind him, and stepped into the quiet evening, not as a celebrity, not as a worker, but simply as a man who had found peace in the one place he never expected. Not the stage, not the spotlight, but in a warehouse full of broken machines and healing hearts.